All right. Well, thank you again. Thank you for being with us. Here we are already on the fourth chapter of the Introduction to the Science of Mind textbook in the 2017 Back to the Basics series. Now, I've been doing this for 25 or 26 years officially, and every January we go back and we start at the first chapter of the Introduction. And through the month of January, we go through those first four chapters because, as I said at the beginning, that is the foundation. That is the foundation upon which we stand and upon which we learn. It kind of lays out for us the purpose of the rest of the teaching, that which we will be learning and that which we will be applying. And every year that I do this, I get a different message. I get something that's been there all along, but perhaps I wasn't ready for it. Perhaps there were other things that I needed to work on first. But every year it seems to me that there's something new, something else that reveals itself to me that says, oh, yeah, okay, that's how that works. That's how that fits. And that's why we do this every year. We do this every year. We ask people to kind of go back and think about, well, why do we come together? And why are we studying together? And what difference does it make? Why should we invest an hour of our time on a Sunday and the hours that we spend in class, the hours that we spend reading, and more important, the hours that we spend in our actual spiritual practice? Why do we do this? What is the purpose of it? And I think going back to the basics is important. Emerson, probably one of the best known American authors and clergymen, only had 26 sermons, and he had them written out, and he gave each sermon twice a year. And the idea is, as we said last week, you can't step in the same river twice. Our consciousness is a stream that's moving, and we hear these things. And even though we hear similar things over and over, year after year, they have a different effect on us. So this chapter, this fourth chapter of the Science of Mind textbook, maybe I should give just a brief history first to put it in context. Ernest Holmes was born in the late 1800s in Maine, and when he was 19 years old, he went to Boston to work at one of his brother's businesses. And when he got to Boston, he discovered the writings of Emerson. And Dr. Holmes said reading Emerson was like taking a drink of cool water on a hot day. He found somebody whose ideas resonated with his own, the ideas that he had developed, as a young man growing up in backwoods Maine. And his brother Fenwick says there were only a couple books in the home. They had the Bible, they had an illustrated children's Bible, and they had a book by, I believe it was either Hudson or Drummond, and it was called Natural Law in a Spiritual Universe. And Dr. Holmes' mother used to attend, in those days they had a lecture circuit. And that's what people did for entertainment before radio, before TV. Lecturers would come through town, they would go to the lecture hall, people would go and pay whatever it was, 50 cents or a nickel or whatever, and they would listen to the lecture, and then the lecturers would sell pamphlets in the back of the room. And people that had the money and wanted them would buy the pamphlets and take them home. But that's what his mother did in order to keep expanding her ideas. And he was a part of that. He was a part of that culture that said it's okay to question, it's good to think, it's okay to ask. His mother called him the little question mark because he was such a curious boy. But when he got to be about 19, he went to Boston, and he was exposed to two things. One was the ideas of Emerson, and the second was the ideas of Mary Baker Eddy. Wherever Dr. Holmes was working, one of the men in that department, his wife was a Christian Science practitioner, and Ernest Holmes went and took lessons with her and studied with her, and you can kind of see all of these ideas starting to fit together. As I told you, the first four chapters are his restatement of Thomas Troward's work, The Creative Process in the Individual. So Dr. Holmes was reading. He was reading Emerson. He was reading Troward. He was reading Mary Baker Eddy. And later in life, he went and he studied with Emma Curtis Hopkins, who was called the teacher of teachers. She taught thousands of ministers, New Thought ministers, in her seminary in Chicago. So Dr. Holmes wrote his first works in the late 1910s, around 1916 to 1919, I believe. He started to write, and he and his brother Fenwick. Fenwick was was a Unitarian, a Congregationalist minister out in California, and he got Ernest to go out there, and Ernest took a job working for Parks Department, Parks and Recreation, out in Venice, California. And the two of them in the evenings and on weekends would go and they would give lectures on what we would now call New Thought. They were known as Emersonian lecturers, and that's how they got started together. Fenwick later came into religious science. Fenwick also was a divine science minister in New York City. He pastored the church that Emmett Fox pastored before Emmett Fox was there. So you can see all these things kind of weaving their way together. In 1926, Ernest Holmes wrote the first version of the textbook, and you can, if you search for 1926 Science of Mind text, you'll find it in a PDF file out online. One of the churches has it out there. And then in 1936, the textbook underwent a revision and some editing. And that's the version that we use now. That has stayed the same since 1936. Every edition, no matter how large the print, every edition is paginated the same. And that's because over the years, many teachers put together lessons, and they would say, well, if you go to page so-and-so, paragraph so-and-so, it says this. And they've preserved that pagination over the years so that all of the teaching derivative work that has been done is still valid. You know, people don't have to go searching for it. So it was early on in his career that he wrote this fourth chapter of the textbook, and he starts out by saying, you know, that there's kind of a danger that, or a problem, that we might spend too much time talking about the theory, talking about the law, talking about the spiritual nature of the universe, and we spend too little time in practical application. You know, and I think you could probably say the same about most things. You know, people love the theory. They love to get into the theory. They love to talk about the theory. You know, I love to read about what the quantum physicists are doing. I don't have a clue, nor understand it, nor even pretend to understand it. You know, somebody gave me Stephen Hawking's book, A Brief Moment in Time. I bet it's 20 years ago they gave me this book. And before that, I had the Dancing Wu Li Masters, and I would pick them up every once in a while and open them up and read a chapter and think, hey, I'm starting to understand this, you know. And then I would turn a page and go into the next chapter and say, I don't have a clue. I don't have a clue. But I love reading about the theory, you see. I love reading about the theory. I can't apply it. I can't do anything with it. It has no practical value to me. You know, I can't use it. I wouldn't know what to do with it. But it just fascinates me that there are people in the world who understand the theory and they can apply the theory. The theory is there and it's available for everyone. But not everyone makes use of it. You know, not everyone can go to the collider in Europe and understand how to conduct experiments or what to do. So to kind of bring it to a more practical level than quantum physics, because I believe that probably escapes most of us, I want to take you back in time to the early 1900s and to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, Kill Devil Hills, North Carolina. At that time, there were a lot of people in the world, not just the United States, but in Europe as well. There were a lot of people in the world who were trying to solve the problem of controlled heavier than air flight, right? They had balloons and they could go up in balloons. And when you're up in a balloon, there's not a whole lot you can do. You go with the wind and you can drop sandbags to go up, and you can release hot air out of the balloon to come down. And that's about it. Once you go up, you're pretty much at the mercy of the winds. So this longing for a heavier than air craft that was controllable and could have an engine on it, a power on it, this was kind of a quest that people had. There was prize money to be had, you know, so there were rich people who understood the implications of what such an advance would mean to humankind, and they were offering prize money for somebody who could do this. And people all over were trying to solve this problem. And pretty much what they were doing, if you've seen the old movies, you know, they would build a wing out of some light material like balsa wood and paper, and make some kind of a harness in it that they could hold onto, and they would run and jump off a cliff, or they would run down the side of a hill, and they would go out in the air. Now the problem was they couldn't steer it, they couldn't control it. They were kind of helpless, just like the balloons were helpless once they got caught in the breeze. These people, once they jumped off the side of the mountain, that was it. Their fate was up to just luck. So if a wind gust came and turned them on their side, they would fall out of the sky and they would die. Lots of people died trying this. So it was an important problem to try to solve, and yet people were busy at it. And the Wright brothers were from Dayton, Ohio, and they realized that down at the Outer Banks of North Carolina there were steady breezes, and they could tether their aircraft in the breeze, kind of like a kite, and maybe they could learn how to develop controlled flight in an environment where they weren't at such great danger as diving off of a cliff with a piece of a wooden wing on their back. But there's something else down there at Kitty Hawk that made a difference for them: the seabirds. Now, if you've ever lived by the water where the seabirds are, there are periods of time where stiff breezes come in, and they'll set in for hours, or sometimes they'll set in for days. When I was a kid, we lived right on the water, and I can remember coming home from school and climbing up to the highest floor of the house and just looking out the window at the birds. And what would happen is they were trying to go back to their nesting area, but the breeze was coming straight from the nesting area. And the birds would flap their wings and they would get up, you know, about the same level as the second or third floor of the house. And they would spread their wings in a glide. And the wind was blowing back at them at just the same amount that they were actually moving forward in their glide. So from my point of view, they were hovering right outside my window. They were just stationary right there. And it was fascinating. I could watch them for hours, you know. And what would happen is a wind gust would come and the bird would kind of get knocked off balance. And if you watch it, what it would do is it would rotate its wings, or it would warp its wings, twist them, and it would twist its tail. And it was through warping the wings and twisting its tail that the bird was able to maintain control, to maintain stability. And the Wright brothers observed this. They observed this in the seagulls flying in the breeze down at Kitty Hawk. And they came up with a theory. Suppose we built our airplane, we designed our airplane in a manner that allowed us to warp the wings and move the tail. Would that give us better control? And that's what they did. The first Wright flyers, and there's models of them down at the museum down at Kitty Hawk. The first Wright flyers, the pilot actually laid on a platform and would twist his body around, and as the pilot moved his body one side or the other, the wings on the plane would warp, and it would make corrections, and they could control the plane. They could make it turn. Later on, they gave up the wing warping technique and the idea of ailerons was developed. My point is by observing what was going on, they got a theory, and then they applied that theory, and then they experimented with that theory. See? And in experimenting with the theory, they got feedback. Well, how much do you have to warp the wing in order to maintain control? How long does the wing have to be? How wide does the wing have to be? All of these things. It was only when they came to actually applying it that they were able to perfect their theory. And they eventually came up with an airplane that they could control, and they put an engine on it. And they flew at a very short distance down at Kitty Hawk, less than the wingspan of a 747 from one side to the other. But that's all they needed, because once they knew that they could achieve powered flight and they could control the airplane, that was it. They didn't need Kitty Hawk anymore. They could go back to Dayton. They could work on perfecting their machine, and they could fly in the open fields over Dayton, which they did. Now the interesting thing is that the folks in Europe were still diligently working on trying to solve the problem of controlled flight. And they were still jumping off cliffs and dying. And word came to them that the Wright brothers had achieved the goal, and they didn't believe it. They didn't believe it. They didn't think it could be done. They just refused to believe it. So one of the Wright brothers packed the plane up in crates, put it on a ship, steamed over to Paris, They went out to a horse race track, had a crowd come out. He assembled the plane, started the engine, took off, and flew a circular course around the racetrack and landed. And that's all he did. And that was enough. What happened then was the people saw that the theory had been applied. They saw that it worked. And that was all they needed. Within a very short time, somebody in Europe flew across the English Channel for the first time. And powered flight started to take off. Once the theory had been applied, once people could see what could be done with it, everything changed. So I realize that's kind of a long explanation, but I think this is what Dr. Holmes is kind of getting us to. We have this theory, we have this idea, we have this teaching. And it's very simple, and it's very direct. The universe is a spiritual system. The activity of spirit is a mental activity, is thought. That when spirit thinks, there is something which is also a part of spirit that acts as law, as a blind force, that then brings about whatever it is that the volitional part of spirit has called into being. This is what is represented to us in the creation myths of the different cultures. In the beginning there was nothing, there's void, there's chaos, and that's not a beginning, that's not like the definitive beginning. It's the beginning of anything. It's the beginning of any new experience. There's chaos, there's confusion, right? Everything is kind of up in the air. We don't know exactly what to do. And in the midst of this chaos, something happens. We get a new idea. This is William Bridges' book on transitions. He says we're taught that everything has a beginning and a middle and an end. He says, and actually there's an end and then a middle and then a new beginning. And that middle is the chaos. So something ends in our lives. It's time for it to go. It's time for us to move on. And then there's this chaos and this confusion, and we don't know what to do. We don't know where to go. And should we move here? Should we move there? Should we study for this career or that career? And all these other things that we go through. And then the voice of intuition, the voice of inspiration, the voice of reason perhaps gets clear for us. We get an idea. See, we get an idea. Now the power that responds to the divine when the divine says let it be, that power also responds to us because we are its image and likeness, right? When it created us, what did it have to create out of? Only itself, only itself. We are some part of it. Joel Goldsmith tells us that when we finally come to understand that the I that I am is the I am, right? The I am. That the walls of separation are gone. Does not mean that we are all that God is, but it means that what we are is some part of God. Just as a wave is not the entire ocean, but the wave is part of the ocean expressing itself as a wave. So we come to realize then that the universe is a mental universe. It's a spiritual system. The activity of spirit is thought, is mental activity. That when the divine creates, the act of creation is the act of involution. It is the act of declaring. It is the act of saying, let there be. Then something acts upon that, let there be, knows exactly what to do. It knows how to create universes and galaxies and stars and planets and oceans and continents and plants and birds and animals and fishes and human beings. And it does so in an orderly fashion that moves things forward in a constant direction. As we discussed last week, with every iteration, increased freedom, increased intelligence, and increased self-awareness. This self-awareness, this self-realization, that is the destiny of our soul. Until we begin to awaken, until we begin to become self-realized, to recognize the presence of God within us, we are still functioning at just a material level, at the level of the same level as the animal kingdom. Not that there's anything wrong with animals, they're beautiful. But we haven't stepped into our full potential. We haven't stepped into, as Thomas Troward would call, the fifth kingdom, the spiritual kingdom. We haven't stepped into what the Kabbalists would call the speaker. Right? We must become the speaker in our own lives. So we're stuck with this proposition then that there's this power in the universe that responds to us exactly according to our belief. And it does so whether we choose to believe deliberately or not. See, that is kind of the crux of the issue for us. Whether we choose to believe or not, it doesn't matter to the law. I think we really have to come to grips with that. We really have to understand it and accept that. You know? Gravity is always working on the mass of our bodies, whether we are aware of it or not, whether we are awake or we are asleep. Gravity is always working on the mass of our bodies. The law of mind, the power that responds to us according to our belief, is always working on our belief. It doesn't stop working because we do not consciously choose to believe. If we allow our beliefs to wander here and there, the circumstances in our lives appear to be here and there. If we spend 23 and a half hours a day complaining about how terrible the world is, and we spend 30 minutes a day treating ourselves to know how beautiful the world is, we've got a struggle going on there, you see. We must become mindful. We must change our minds, and we must keep our minds changed. So I believe if we truly understand, if we truly come to understand that we don't have a choice in whether the law is working or not working, but we do have a choice on whether we consciously cooperate with it, then we are going to be more likely to want to deliberately and consciously choose to work with the law. So in this fourth chapter of the textbook, Dr. Holmes is imploring us, in this fourth chapter, the introduction, I should say, he's imploring us, use it, use it. Don't just talk about it, don't just think about it, don't just write songs about it. Use it directly, simply, without superstition, without arrogance, to use it. Sometimes we get arrogant in terms of, Emma Curtis Hopkins says, sometimes we get sick and we use the power of treatment to reveal health. And then we're proud that we were able to regain our health through spiritual power. And she says, you don't deserve a medal for allowing yourself to get sick. You see, the same power that restored to health would have prevented you from getting sick had you turned to it on a conscious basis, had you turned to it before. So we go into these little lapses of a lack of mindfulness. We go into these little lapses where our mind is, I think it's Osho said this, our mind is like a stray dog and we follow it. It's just wandering everywhere and we go after it and we follow it. And things come on the news and we get caught up in the news and we get caught up in conversation. We get caught up in whatever our friends are posting on Facebook, and we get caught up in all that. And we forget that whatever we're caught up in, we are speaking our word. We are speaking our word into the law. This is why Don Miguel says, be impeccable with your word. Be impeccable with your word. Not only the things that you agree to, but the things that you fail to disagree with. And he tells us that which you're quiet to, you are silently giving your agreement to. What we have to do is, at least in our consciousness, when we hear something that's not true, say, no, that's not true. That's not my truth. No, I don't accept that. I don't accept that. It's cold and flu season, and a certain percentage of the population is going to get sick. I don't believe that. I don't accept that as my truth. That doesn't have to be true for me. Not everybody gets sick. A certain percentage of people get sick. But I don't have to be one of them. See? So we have to be impeccable with our word. We have to be aware of what we are thinking. We have to want to do this, and then we have to deliberately do this. We have to deliberately do this, but not just once or twice in a day, not just once in the morning, once at bedtime. We have to, over time, we have to develop ourselves. We have to develop the mindfulness. What am I thinking now? What am I believing now? What am I giving my consent to now? Do I really want that to show up in my life? Now, the way that we know this is true, this is where the application comes down. So far up until this point, we're talking about theory, the theoretical aspect of the law of mind. And we say, well, how do I know that that's true? How would I know that? And the only way you're going to know it is to apply it. The only way the Wright brothers were going to know whether warping the wings of their airplane was going to give them control was to try it. See, when we go ahead and we apply the theory, when we take, and again, it's very simple. We have a very simple theory. It's done unto you according to your belief, and you have a technique called treatment, which is a specific way of going about changing your belief. Once you begin to apply what you know, you start to see the changes in your life. You start to see the changes in your circumstances. Dr. Holmes said, if this law is here and you don't know how to work with it, it doesn't make a bit of difference to you. It's like me in quantum physics, you know. The laws of quantum physics are there. I don't have a clue what to do with them other than to read about them and enjoy reading about them. But if you asked me to do something practical with them, I could not. I would not know how to do that. For me, they might not as well exist. Emmett Fox tells us that that if you go back to the biblical time of Exodus and you have this image of Moses leading the Israelites across the desert and across the Reed Sea and into the Promised Land, you know, they've got this burning torch in front of them. That's the way they guided the military columns in those days, by the way. In the day, the people up front, they had a pole, and on the top of the pole there was a basket carrying fire. And in the daytime they put wet grass on it and it gave smoke, and at nighttime the glow, and that's how the troops would know where to follow. So Moses is leading the Israelites across the desert with this pillar of fire, and he could have had a flashlight. See, the principles of electricity existed at that time. The only thing that stopped people from having flashlights in those days was they hadn't studied the theories and they hadn't applied the theories. But the principle of electricity worked. If we could get in a time machine and take our flashlight back with us to those days, the flashlight would still work. Even though it hadn't yet been invented, it would still work because the principles of electricity existed thousands of years ago. So it only becomes available to us consciously when we use it consciously. It is working through our beliefs all the time. It's working through our thoughts all the time. But unless we take the time to prove that to ourselves, it does us no good. We just continue to believe this, that, or the other thing. We continue to give our emotions away to whoever stirs them up. You know, we continue to get caught up in whatever dramas the world about us presents to us that day. And the law keeps acting upon those, and we keep getting more of those in our lives. So at some point, we have to make the decision, I am going to test this myself. Like the Wright brothers, I'm going to build that airplane, and I'm going to get on it, and I'm going to test this. I'm going to test this myself. I am going to apply what I have learned about deliberately changing my beliefs. I'm going to observe what I'm giving my attention to. I'm going to be impeccable with my word. I'm not just going to do it for a few minutes in the morning and then completely undo it as soon as I go out the door. We have to change our minds and keep them changed. And then I'm going to observe the differences in my life. This is what he's asking us to do. To use it. And there's two reasons for this, and I want to bring these out because they're most important, number one, and number two, there's kind of some reluctance or some criticism in that people will say, well, you're trying to use God. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to use God to get more money or to get a better car or a better house or a better job or those things. So there's a reluctance in there. Now, the first thing is that statement about, well, getting a better job or getting a better house or getting a better car, that implies separation in itself, that somehow cars and jobs and money are not spiritual entities in themselves. They are God's supply, which is an invisible spiritual force. They are God's supply taking a tangible form in our lives. Now, we can become overly attached to those things. Right? We can try to accumulate more than we could ever need or use. We can become very materialistic, and we need to watch out for that. But if we need $100 to pay our bills, there is absolutely nothing wrong with using treatment to change our consciousness to produce the avenue through which the law of supply can find a way to produce that $100 for us. So that's the first thing. We have to recognize that we have no choice. The law is working for us all the time, or it's working with us or against us even all the time. So we might as well learn to use it deliberately. And there's nothing that's not spiritual. So again, that's a resistance. But if you have a resistance for those things, find something that you don't have a resistance against. Find something that you can treat for. Find something that you can open yourself up to, a greater expression of love, a greater expression of creativity, of your art or your poetry or your music, greater ideas for your business. How can you be of greater service to more people? All of these things are things that you can choose to practice with. Now, in learning how to use it, in learning how to deliberately apply it, what we're doing is these two things. The first is we're getting feedback for ourselves. We are learning which technique works for us, which technique does not work for us. We are learning how to perhaps change things around. We're learning that it's not just the words that we use, but it is the feeling that the words evoke for us. Right? So we're getting that feedback. And imagine one of the Wright brothers laying on that airplane that they made, that the wings are warped and it's tethered by a rope to the ground, and a gust of wind comes along and it lifts up in the air. And he starts moving his body back and forth and twisting the wings and trying to keep it stable. And of course it doesn't work all the time. There's going to be crashes. But they weren't that high up that they were deadly. But he needed that feedback. The example I gave in my email last night is one most of us are familiar with in learning how to drive a car, The essential instructions on driving a car were simple. The pedal on the right makes it go, and the pedal on the left makes it stop, and the lever tells it whether to go forward or backward. The steering wheel makes it go side to side. That's all you really need to go. The rest is practice. And then, of course, your dad or somebody takes you out into a parking lot late at night, and you get behind the wheel and you step on the gas and you find out, whoa, that went a lot faster than I wanted it to. I better hit the brakes. And then you hit the brake and you go, whoa, that stopped a whole lot faster than I wanted to. You need feedback. You need to learn just how much gas to give and just how much brake to give. You need to learn just how much to turn that wheel side to side so you can go around the corner without clipping the curb. You need that feedback. So the first thing about using it is you're making a decision to consciously cooperate with something that's already working. It's already working whether you choose to consciously cooperate with it or not. But what you're doing is you're getting feedback. You're getting feedback. What works and what doesn't work. The second thing, and the most important thing, is the only way it works is when your soul grows. The only way it works is when you come into a deeper realization of God. Dr. Holmes tells us with all you're getting, you have to first get God. So if you're experiencing lack in your life, and your treatment is for an increase in supply in your life in some particular form, be it money, or maybe you're treating for a better job, or you're treating for a better place to live, whatever. The only way you're going to get that is when you grow in your consciousness, when your soul grows to the point that you recognize that, yes, God is all there is. God is my source, my substance, and supply. Everything that we have is some part of the energy of God taking the right form, It's easiest to see this when you sit down at food. To me, this is the blessing of your meal. When you recognize that what you are eating is the sunshine, literally the sunshine that has taken the form of the plant, that has become the grain that you are eating. It became the grass that the cow ate, which then became the milk that the cow gave, and now you have this bowl of cereal in front of you. And you have sunshine that has taken form of milk, and sunshine that has taken form of corn. And you have a miracle going on right here of the energy of the sun that has somehow taken the right form to supply your body with what it needs. When we open ourselves up in that sense of gratitude, we start to realize that everything that we need is the energy of God in some form coming to us, whether it be another person coming to us with an idea, whether it be another person coming to us with a better job offer, whether it be a person who gives us a gift of money, whether it be an idea in our consciousness that leads us to the good that is already there for us. It doesn't matter. It is all the energy of spirit. So the only way we get our demonstrations is by growing deeper in our consciousness of God. And then eventually what happens is our desire is simply, as Dr. Holmes said, is simply to be at home with the beloved. The desire to use the law in order to create a better human life is a period that we go through. It's natural, it's normal, it's a period that we go through. But at some point we grow so deep in our spiritual understanding that all we want is to be at home with God. That's all we want. I was watching a program on YouTube this week, and they had a Sufi, a rabbi, and a Christian monk who are all mystics. And they were talking about the mystical experience. And it was amazing to me to watch these three people from totally different traditions all nodding their head when the other was speaking. So one would be speaking and the other two would be going like this. Yes, yes. And then they started talking about the books that they had read, and the Catholic monk started to quote Buddhism, and the rabbi started to quote Ram Dass. And the Sufi mystic who had started out, she said in metaphysics, but she didn't say what branch. She was quoting everybody. And all of them were nodding their heads. You see, all of them were coming into agreement. They all had experienced something so much deeper than their culture and their tradition that they could relate at that level. See? And the lady who was the Sufi mystic said that the first time she had a mystical experience, she had no idea what was happening. That's typical for most of us. It happens. We say, "Well, God, what was that? Am I losing my mind? What was that?" And she said, but when it happened, she knew from that moment that she had been home, and all she wanted to do was to return. She said that became the burning desire in her life, was to return to that experience of the presence of God. And Dr. Holmes has given us a path to get there through treatment, through applying the law, through changing our consciousness. Because what happens is when we do our treatment, the treatment works by producing an opening in our consciousness. It is like a light shining into the darkness. Old limiting ideas are dissolved. New empowering ideas are developed. And the good that is already there then flows through us into our existence. So we start to learn that it is that opening that is what is really important. It is that opening. It's like going for the walk in the neighborhood. Yes, it's beautiful to go for the walk in the neighborhood, but the process of walking improves our health, and the process of treating improves our soul. At the very end of his public career, when Dr. Holmes was stepping down from the ministry, he gave a very famous talk, and if you'll search for it, you'll find it on the internet. Search for Ernest Holmes' Sermon by the Sea at Asilomar. I think it was 1959 that he gave this. It was the very last talk that he gave publicly. And in that talk, he was also imploring people to use what we teach. Now, Asilomar, for those who have never been there, Asilomar is a Spanish word that means refuge by the sea. And Asilomar is a conference center in Pacific Grove, California. It sits between Monterey to the north and Pebble Beach. In fact, from the sun deck of the meeting, the big registration room, you can look out, and on a good day, you can see the golfers out at Pebble Beach trying to drive into the wind, which is kind of like watching a seagull fly into the wind. But that's where it is, and it's a beautiful setting. One time we were there, and we were sitting on the deck, and Lori was looking out at the ocean, and she says, "Oh my goodness, a whale!" She could see a whale kind of making its way up the coast. I couldn't see it; my eyes didn't go that far, but she could see it. It was just a magnificent setting. So that became a conference center where religious scientists would go for years. They would go, and there would be like 1,000 people there. They could feed 1,000 people in the dining hall at one time. Magnificent place. And Dr. Holmes was giving his final talk there. And he was imploring people. He said, keep it simple. Keep it simple. We've done away with superstition. We've done away with dogma. We've done away with creed. Don't let it creep back into the teaching. Keep the teaching pure. Keep the teaching simple. Let our practitioners and our instructors, he didn't even call them ministers, let our practitioners and our instructors keep it pure and keep it simple. And he told the people, but you have to remember, this isn't something that we do for 1 week of the year where we come together at Asilomar and we just feel really good. Because you do feel really good. If you've ever been there, you do feel really good. You're around 1,000 like-minded people. There's great lectures, there's great music, there's great workshop, there's great food. You get this glow, everybody's kind of glowing. He says, you have to go back home. You have to go back home and you have to take what you have learned and you have to use it. Because as you learn to use it, as you begin to apply it, your life changes. And just like the Wright brothers going over to Europe and demonstrating what they had learned, that had an effect on others. So as others begin to see your life change, they may eventually come up to you and say, what are you doing? Something's working for you. Something's different for you. Now that's not your goal, to go out and change the world. And you don't try to give away what you have until somebody comes to you and asks for it. We have too many people in the world trying to give away what they don't have and nobody's asked for. But if you will take the theory, and the theory is simple, and you will take the technique, and the technique is simple, and if you will actually apply it, if you will choose 3 things today, 3 circumstances in your life that you want to see changed within this year, and begin to do treatment for them, one at a time. And Dr. Holmes is very clear in this chapter. How long do you do your treatment? Until the demonstration is made. You keep treating until the demonstration is made. You keep treating until your shift in consciousness is complete. Right? Because as I said before, we do our treatment in the morning and we run out the door and immediately we undo what we just did. We keep treating until the demonstration is made. And when the first thing appears in your life, you go ahead and you treat for the second. When the second thing appears, you go ahead and you treat for the third. But we have to use it. We have to apply what we know. If the theory is correct, that there's a power in the universe that responds to you exactly according to your belief, and it is working on your belief all the time, then the only sane thing to do is to take conscious control of what you're believing. Most of the beliefs that we have, we did not adopt consciously. They kind of snuck in there, like weeds in a garden. They snuck in there. But if we are to step into our spiritual power, if we are to step into the fifth kingdom, as George calls it, we must become conscious choosers. We must live deliberately. We must live consciously. You have everything that you need. It's already been taught. It's already been given. You have everything that you need. We have the mastermind group that meets on Monday evenings every other week, where we can help you learn how to use treatment for changes in your life. We have Skype classes on Wednesday where we can discuss other ideas. We're always available for you to help you. Just reach out. But the choice is yours. The choice is up to each and every one of us. Is this the year? Is this the fourth Sunday in January when Dr. Holmes calls us to action? Is this the year that we go into action a little bit more deeply than last year? A little bit more committed than last year? A little bit more surely than last year? So that we can take this abstract theory out of its abstraction, and we can show that it is a tangible, palatable power in our lives. One thing that I learned when I was in the change business, organizational change, is that everybody wants change as long as they're not the ones that have to change. That was kind of the running gag. I would go around to do an assessment in a department, and I would ask them, do you think we need to change? Oh yeah, we need to change. I said, well, what does that change look like? And that change was always, well, those guys down the hall there, they need to do something differently, and those guys down the hall there, they need to do something differently. And I would say, well, what about your department? And they would say, oh no, we're perfect, we're fine. And I said, well, I just talked to those guys down the hall there and those guys down the hall there, and they don't agree with you. It's nice to know. It's nice to know that there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. But do you really want to change? Do you really want to change? Dr. Holmes gave us a starting place that's tangible and palpable to us, in that we can have a better life. And in so doing, it leads us to simply a greater desire to know God. So I ask you the question, and I invite you to consider it this week. Is this the year? Is this the year that you're going to do something deliberately and consciously? Make time to do your spiritual practice. Make time to read and study and listen to talks. There's thousands of talks out there on the internet. I think I've got like 600 out there in different places, and I'm not the only teacher that puts them out there. So there's lots of resources available. But the starting point, Napoleon Hill tells us this in Think and Grow Rich, the starting point of all achievement is desire. And the question is, do we have the desire? And if we don't yet have the desire, but we would like to have the desire, we can use treatment to open ourselves up to a greater desire to know God, a greater desire to know how to apply these things that we've learned. And we can begin right where we are. So welcome to a magnificent journey in 2017, a magnificent year of discovering just how great God is and how great God is as us and through us. how wonderful it is to live in a spiritual universe. How wonderful it is to know that our good does not depend upon what's going on in D.C. or the state capitol or anywhere else, but our good depends upon only one thing, our connection with God. And we have the theory and the tools to make a deeper connection if we will only apply them. And I think this is the year that we will. And so it is.